In this series, I explore an old, seemingly abandoned, retrofuturistic space nation. Join me as I work my way from the rural countryside, through industrial complexes, military bases, all the way into the city centre of a megacity, where I had an encounter that will never make me the same again. This is the second part out of 6. In this episode, I explore an abandoned military base with intact space shuttles and control rooms. Follow along as I go deeper and deeper into the story behind the mysteriously abandoned space nation of X2A7. Even though I'm used to expeditions with a sparse diet, walking and climbing this much burns through calories like nothing else. I really needed to find something to bump up my energy levels. Otherwise, I had to revert to less appetizing alternatives like worms and bugs if I were to continue pushing on for some days more. And I really wanted to, because I had a feeling that there was something really special with the distant military base I had seen. And in retrospect, I'm so grateful I persevered. I reached the airbase after skipping some barbed wire with the aid of a blanket. The first building was like a central hub, mainly containing what looked like traffic control equipment. An airfield's length further down, I found several hangars and other smaller buildings, and when I entered the first hangar, my jaw dropped to the floor. It was as if I had stepped into a retro sci-fi movie or something. Inside the building, a large, worn space shuttle greeted me. It sent shivers down my spine. It's one thing to find an old airplane, it's a whole nother thing finding a spacecraft. This opens up for so many potential facets for the parallel reality. I walked the steps up towards the entry hatch and crossed my fingers. It opened and my arms started tingling. I was filled with a sense of awe as I crawled inside the ship. I entered on the level beneath the cockpit in a dark and cramped control room of some sort. But here, my luck ended. The next hatch was locked. It had a thick glass centre, but I couldn't see anything on the other side. It was pitch dark. I laughed at myself when I looked at what looked like a power lever, like it would make any difference in a space shuttle that had been abandoned for more than 20 years. But I couldn't exit without having tried it out. And I think you can guess what happened. Absolutely nothing. I followed a thick cable running from the space shuttle all the way into an adjacent room to the hangar. It looked like a control room of some sort, maybe for running diagnostics on the ship or something. Once again, I found a large power switch on the wall next to the door. I can't leave knobs and levers untouched. It's a curse and sometimes a blessing. I turned the dusty breaker and a mechanical click sounded, followed by silence. Suddenly, I heard a distantly familiar sound of an old glow switch turning on somewhere in the ceiling's light fixtures. My heart raised uncontrollably as the whole control room lit up and started blinking like a Christmas tree. "No way," I said to myself. "There is still power to this place. How?" I stood there baffled, looking at all the controls, lights and screens that were showing different initializing and boot-up messages. In the middle of all the excitement, it was like a hypnic jerk shot through my body. I was startled by large banging sounds emanating from the hangar. It came from large light fixtures turning on, and that was not the only thing being switched on. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw a faint light from the cockpit windscreens, all aboard the Space Express. I whispered to myself as I once again walked towards the stairs to the hatch. The second hatch now opened and revealed some kind of service shaft leading upwards. After opening a third hatch, I slowly stuck my head through it and peeked. It was dark and hard to distinguish anything. Only a few red lights and sparse light emanating from the hangar coming through the windscreens in the cockpit. I squeezed myself through the hatch and crawled inside the tight cockpit. It was so enthralling seeing all the different meters, knobs, switches and buttons. And not to forget, all the panels displaying codes and diagnostics results. Although probably not fueled, I didn't want to take the risk, so I left all controls untouched. I really defied my OCD on that one. Even if it was fueled, the fuel would probably not be usable after all this time, but better safe than sorry. I don't want to be on an old rusty space shuttle burning jet fuel inside a hangar. I made my way back to the service hatch in search for a light switch of some sort. I pulled all the levers and knobs I could find, and suddenly, voila, let there be light. The shuttle was quite smaller than I expected. Counting from the beds, the shuttle wasn't fitted for a crew larger than 4 unless they slept in shifts. It was unlike any spacecraft I've ever seen back home. It looked more like it was designed for ordinary living rather than making manned expeditions into the deep dark unknown. I stayed in the shuttle for more than an hour, trying to find documents and other clues. I laughed to myself after finally dragging myself out of the craft onto the next hangar, only to find 2 more shuttles, even bigger than the last one. I searched through them for hours without any particular findings other than some service documents, different types of ledgers, and information about crews. The lack of energy was getting to me, and I realized that I needed to prioritize food above all. I climbed a radio tower trying to get an overview of the area. It was massive, clearing after clearing with more runway, hangars and other buildings. No way that I could explore all this in a reasonable time. I took aim on a long building with what looked like loading docks, crossed my fingers that it contained some sort of foodstuff for the old belly and not gas masks, explosives and jet fuel. I had to smash a large window to get inside the warehouse. After doing a less gracious entry, landing on my shoulder on hard concrete, I was greeted by a myriad of containers and boxes in the first of several repositories. The odds were in my favour. Hopefully food, but at least something usable should be in here. The first box was anything but atypical, gas masks. The second one, gas masks. Third one, first aid kits. Fourth one, getting better, backpacks. Several more containers filled with clothing, boots and more gas masks. I decided to try some other repositories and see if the content varied. Second room. Smaller suitcases filled with electronic instruments, backpacks and comm radios, cooking appliances and water bottles. I ditched the hobo bindle and treated myself with a backpack, some water bottles and a portable gas stove. Most storage rooms had locked metal containers, probably filled with weapons. There were no tools to confirm my theory. One storage room was filled with bicycle and car tires, which got me thinking that I could probably find a bike. It would be much appreciated. After some time, I finally hit the mother lode, a container filled with a small mountain of canned foods. I'm quite seasoned after my many travels, so I know better than to get my hopes up just because I've found some cans. I have no idea how long they've been there, if the cans are intact, etc. Soups and stews are usually a better choice than fruit and fish. I picked a bunch of varied cans and sampled them one by one. Some of them tasted like a mixture between wet cardboard, puke and dirt. But I managed to find some that didn't taste that much at all. Better no taste than much taste if it's bad. As long as I get some energy and avoid getting sick, I'm happy. Trust me, you don't want to know what I've eaten on other expeditions. It was not pretty at all. It was beginning to get dark outside. With my newfound energy from the tasteless stews, I made a final effort to search through the premises before it got too dark. After going through some more storage rooms, I finally found one with some half-decent bicycles. Of course, the inner tubes had become porous and non-functional, but I also knew where to find containers filled with new ones. Now, I only needed to find a pump to be all set and done. I managed to find one and repair the tires just before the last milky rays of sunlight disappeared and left me in darkness inside one of the warehouses. It got eerie silent. I fumbled with my backpack, but managed to set up the portable gas stove. I shook the canister and heard that it still had gas in it. I scraped the tinderbox and crossed my fingers that the gas would ignite. It took me a few tries, but I managed to get it lit. I breathed a sigh of relief as the little flame danced around the nozzle. It warmed my cold, stiff fingers, and it felt like pins and needles in them. I cooked up a mean goulash that tasted like fine dining, compared to the other tasteless stews I ate cold before. Unfortunately, I couldn't keep the gas on to warm me more. I only had one small can, and preferred hot food instead of a warm place to sleep. At least the food helped me to keep warm for a little while. As I packed my gear and looked for a comfy place to spend the night, A distant, faint light caught my attention through one of the dirty, large warehouse windows. It wasn't in the direction of the space shuttles that I had explored earlier. It seemed to emanate from quite deep within the forest, painting the night sky with a milky light. My thoughts raced. Was it possible that this place still was inhabited? Had I misjudged the whole situation? I decided that if it indeed was people, I was better off investigating them in the dark rather than running into them in broad daylight. I took the bike for a spin in the dark among the warehouses, praying that I didn't run over broken glass or nails. I followed an adjacent airfield to see if it led me closer to the light source. I pedaled for a good 20 minutes along a runway until I finally saw a clearing in the woods seeming to line up with the lights. I left the bike and walked over a muddy meadow towards the faint light. Water got into my boots from the wet thicket. I found a small path by the end of the clearing. It was narrow and slippery and filled with puddles. I was so tense, and every branch breaking under my feet got my heart to skip beats. I could see a fence running along the path, maybe a furlong away or something. I followed it for about 10 minutes and made it to what looked like an entrance of some sort. Behind it, there were several bright lights. I had found it. I proceeded with caution, listening for unnatural sounds as I pushed deeper in, past the entrance. And quite soon I came across something that once again made my jaw drop. In front of me, surrounded by tall fences, towered a large rocket. It wasn't a space rocket, but more similar to a ballistic missile of some sort. I sneaked around the fence, trying to see if the place was guarded, but I couldn't see anyone. Beyond the launch pad, I saw more lights through the forest, and decided to push on even further. Now my heart skipped even more beats, and a shiver went down my spine. A short walk in, I was greeted by the distant view of what looked like a small space rocket, and not too long down the road there was a small military vehicle parked, and through the fog I could see the distant contours of a tall building. I didn't know what to make out of this. I took a detour from the road, alongside the fence, trying to see if the place was inhabited, but I didn't see any signs. It looked abandoned and overgrown, just like all other buildings, with the difference that these ones still had power and working lights. The distant tall building seemed to be part of a larger skyline, and it got my hopes up that I was getting closer to a real city. I decided to backtrack my steps to fetch my bike. I was getting way too deep into the forest, and I figured the best deal was to push further, but I didn't want to do it without my only means of transportation and my provisions. I spent a great deal of the early night carrying, and sometimes pushing my bike through boggy areas and whipping branches. I decided to pedal further into the night, with the aim towards the distant high-rise. The closer I got, the more I could see the skyline taking form. Unfortunately, I also discovered that there was a large river between me and the supposed conurbation. It was now clear that it was more than just a few blocks, but there was nothing else to do than to turn back around, trying to find a way over the river. I made it to an overgrown empty freeway after half an hour or so. It seemed to be leading toward the suburbs, but I wasn't sure. At least it was a freeway, the largest road I've seen so far, so it must lead to a city of some sort sooner or later, preferably sooner. Some hours into the night, a heavy, deafening rain began to pour down. I had to take refuge at an old roadside diner. I decided to wait the rain out by getting a few hours of well-deserved sleep before continuing. As I laid my head towards my backpack on the dusty diner sofa, my gaze was drawn to a peculiar-looking device lying under the adjacent sofa. It looked like some sort of wristwatch, and what really got me spooked was that its digital screen was flickering faintly.